Hey everybody, how you doing? My name is Des. I'm the director of Alpha Scotland, and I'm also the chair of the Deep Impact Planning Committee. And it's my absolute honour to welcome along the legend that is Tim Frew. Hi, Tim.
Hello.
Tim,
how are you?
Mate, I'm doing really well today. You have a hectic day, though. I know we were just chatting beforehand, so thanks for still making the time to come and chat to us today. I really appreciate it.
Good. I'm just going to keep up with your energy and enthusiasm that you've got. I'll have to try and wake myself up with another coffee.
Yeah, mate, I've just, I'm on the double quadruple espresso or something.
Ah, okay, good.
So, Tim, you're the Youthlink Scotland chief exec, and you kind of oversee the workforce development, communications, events, policies, and research. So, overseeing policy, you're obviously having a great time just now with all of that. So do you want to just, for anybody who doesn't know what Youthlink does, and that, could you just give us a quick overview of what that looks like?
Yeah, so very quickly, so we are the National Agency for Youth Work, and we represent about 16 national volunteer organisations that do youth work and all 32 local authorities. And they're members of Youthlink. They sit within our board as well in governance. So that's organisations like Bernardo's, Prince's Trust, uniformed organisations, SU Scotland, so a whole range of organisations, and each of the local authorities that do youth work. So we're very much a membership organisation. We're an intermediary organisation, but we work very much in partnership with the Scottish Government. So we're not a quango, we're independent, but at the same time we do a lot of stuff in partnership with government and Education Scotland and Health Service and other partners.
Amazing. That was so good. Thanks. So, Tim, we've got a ton of questions. People have been messaging in from Pigeonhole for the last couple of weeks, just with loads of different questions. And we are just going to get started because we've only got an hour. So I want to try and get through as much as we possibly can. And also, if you've got any comments, any thoughts, anything you want to push back at Tim with, specifically, Tim, don't push back at me. This is about Tim. We'd just love to see those, and we can reference them and come through. So let's get started. We've got the first question here, which is, so these were all voted for by the general public, so these are the top selected ones. So as face coverings are required in places of worship, does this mean that any youth work taking place there would also require face coverings? What's your thoughts on that, Tim?
Well, as any good politician, before I answer any of these questions, I just want to do a big disclaimer, that is that the best thing to do is to read the guidance. So I am one of these people that knows a very little about a lot of different things, or maybe a very little about not a lot. But a lot of our stuff is on the website. So if you go into youth work resources, you can look at our guidance around that. There's also an FAQ section, which the sector helped populate. So a number of different organisations work through some of these things. In terms of face coverings, no, in terms of youth work, but it might affect you in terms of, potentially you could use it, or in terms of transport. So if young people are coming to the church to do youth work for transport. So there is this strangeness a little bit between, different guidance coming across each other, and appreciate for many people through this network. Are they there with a church hat on? Are they there with a youth work hat on? Or is it, is it the facility guidance that matters? But, we are expecting kind of social distancing for, if we're talking about 12 plus, to be taking place as much as possible. But in terms of face coverings, that's not something that is required.
Amazing. That's good to know. To be fair, like, you're cleanly shaven, but for me, it's a bit of a nightmare with a beard. I have to go for the full bandana, like hazmat suit option. Maybe I should just shave. That might be easier.
Well, there's lots of Marvel costumes out there, and things like that in DC. I don't want to get into the Marvel DC comics debate, but you could get a whole outfit on, couldn't you?
Yeah. We could have a lot of debates around guidance, but I feel like we could have a lot of fights around Marvel DC. So maybe we should just move on from that. So cool, let's go with the next question. So the next one is, just because the guidance says we can do elements of youth work doesn't mean that we should, and then in brackets, take our time coming back or move quickly to get things re-established. I love this question. I think it's really good.
Yeah, no, it's great. More haste, less speed. Care and safety is paramount. So again, there is that thing when people have been held back from doing what they love to do, they just want to run right to the very edge of what they can do. So the numbers of up to 30 for indoor youth work, suddenly everyone thinks, oh great, we can just kind of run and do that. Well, actually, no, you can't. You need to think about the government and the medical advice that you've got. You've got to think about Public Health Scotland advice. You've got to make sure you've done a comprehensive risk assessment. Have you thought about cleaning? Have you thought about what the facilities are like, personal hygiene? Have you got a kind of test and protect kind of system in place? So these are all new things. So, some of you may not even have had groups with 30 young people in it. So let's just kind of build back, as effectively as you can. If you're well organised and you've put these things in place and you've been waiting for it and you've looked at guidance, then you can do that. And we did want the youth work guidance to be as aligned and as close to what was happening for young people in schools as possible. And I think that makes sense because, it's very much that kind of youth work and education approach that's being taken with workers that know what they're doing, know themselves as adults to keep that distance with the young people. But if you can do things in terms of detached work and digital work outdoor, I've just come from the Digital Youth Work, not today, but yesterday, Digital Youth Work Summit. We had over 200 people involved in the Digital Youth Work Summit across Scotland. And there were people that kind of thought they knew how to use them and didn't, and, are learning lots of new things. So you can still do a bit of outdoors. You can certainly still keep doing bits of digital as well as doing the kind of indoor youth work.
Amazing. It's probably worth just saying as well at this point that obviously some churches and denominations and stuff have been putting out guidance, which should all obviously be in line with everything that's happening, but there may be like extra caveats or extra things. So it's worth just checking with your own denomination as well. Are you seeing that, Tim, that some people are being more cautious with what they're putting out? Or
yeah, there's a huge spread. I guess one of the the good things, I suppose, about the Scottish Government is they've worked really hard to try and understand the different places that we all inhabit, and some of that's new for them. So appreciate some of the church and worship guidance has developed and evolved over time, and likewise all the other bits of guidance. So yeah, I think it's really important that you apply it in your context. It is guidance, but the overarching stuff about public health, the facts, all the different things about hand hygiene and about transport and all of that is kind of clearly publicized. So it's really always starting from that premise and then thinking, well, in my context, I'm doing youth work. What does the youth work say that I can do? Because what you'll find in there is a wee bit more room and more space than you'll find in some of the wider information about general indoor activity with children and young people, which is more restricted, and after today, even more restricted again.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Tim. And I think that leads us really nicely on our kind of next question. So this one just blew up today, and I know that like you guys must be really trying to like answer some of these questions yourselves. So I fully appreciate it. But someone asked on Pigeonhole, and someone's just put up in the comment, which I'm going to share in a second. But do the new limits about only groups of 6 people affect youth work for over 12?
Yeah, so my understanding is no, it doesn't affect that. That's the kind of general information about households. So that's 6 people and 2 households in terms of that restriction. But because the kind of youth work guidance is very much from that education point of view, I've not seen any change around that. We're going to be putting stuff out on our own communications just to confirm that. Might have gone out already. Just was looking at it just before I came on, saying that it's business as usual. I think it is something though then to stop and think though again just about the kind of importance of doing stuff safely and wisely, it's again, just because you can doesn't mean you should. You need to think about what's appropriate for you to handle the kind of ratios that you've got, the kind of building that you're using, the space, the ventilation, all those things. You need to kind of think about through all of those things. But on the other side, we're really keen to get youth work moving again, indoors as well as outdoors, because it's hugely beneficial to young people's well-being. And I'll maybe say a bit more about that later.
Sure. Yeah, and this is the question that we just got in from Claire. It says, are the new restrictions of 6 people going to affect the new guidance on youth work 30, or are we still okay to keep planning and delivering on that basis? So
you're definitely okay to keep going on that basis. And I was confirming all of that just before I come on the call.
Brilliant, thanks. That's why we got you on, Tim. You know, it was almost providence that it was today, after all. Cool. This is quite a specific question. I don't know if you'll be able to answer it or not. I'm sure you are. You seem to be the wealth of all knowledge, to be fair. But what's the best route for church youth workers to support their local schools? And I'm guessing they mean right now.
I think the key word there is local. Every school is independent, and they'll have independent needs and gaps to fill. So asking them what they need is probably the best way to start. You know, they've had quite a stressful kind of return to schooling, as many people who know teachers will say. They didn't stop a lot of the schooling. Actually, things went online. There was a lot of hard work going on, but after that kind of return to the actual school premises and building, they've had a lot of stuff to think about in terms of, you know, getting young people back. And there's a talk kind of within schools about a recovery curriculum. So not running straight into the kind of pressure for young people to get straight into their attainment and straight into kind of, you know, catching up with learning or anything like that, but thinking about their health and well-being. There's a big kind of focus on that. So if you're doing stuff that relates to that in terms of offering support, offering counselling, then I think schools will be interested in that. There's a bit of debate at the minute about who can come into schools and who can't, and that's something that we're actively trying to understand. We've got a member survey that we've put out to see about access to facilities, you know, and that, you know, there is it's being done in different ways in different local authorities and different schools. But I think the main thing to do is ask how you can help, but also not just be put off either if people are going, oh, too busy to talk to you. You know, maybe you come back and say, well, could we have a conversation in another week? Because we know that there's lots of young people who haven't returned to school that you may well be able to pick up and work with and support them in that transition. And also young people in school who are struggling right now and need to have, you know, youth work signposted to them.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Tim. I think it's a really difficult one, isn't it? Because we're all under different pressures. You know, youth workers, you know, educators, like everybody in between. There's a real balance of being able to serve well within that space, which is never easy. And I guess as well with just the stress and strain of everybody's anxiety levels are a little bit higher right now, aren't they? Do you know?
Everybody reacts differently to something like this as well. So again, you probably want to just not be, you know, either put off or overly encouraged by one teacher. You know, let's go to the head teacher. Let's speak to them. Or if you're connected into community learning and development and local authority youth work services, they may know the best way to approach a school through their sort of regional teams and so on, who are already maybe got youth workers who are in the schools. On a different basis than you might be in on the school, and can let you know what the best approach is and what the best offer is.
Amazing, great. Let's keep pressing on, Tim. You know, we're going to make you work for this hour. So what do you see as the biggest challenge within youth work and coming out of lockdown?
Yeah, I guess there's. I think it's about. It's about keeping the hope, really, and the expectation of what youth work is and can deliver. There's clearly going to be a huge negative impact on our economy that's affecting all of us. And one of the calls I was just on this morning was around the youth guarantee with some of the folks in government around, you know, how can we get 100,000 sort of places for young people, either in employment or through training. So, you know, that's kind of 16 to 24-year-old age range. There's a kind of huge sort of issue there about making sure, you know, the stats are not going in the right direction, and we need them to go in the right direction. So what role can youth work play within supporting that sort of employability route? So that's a huge challenge. Funding itself is a challenge. So we did a sector report and found there to be a 20.5 million funding gap before Christmas. We've spoken to government about that. We will have news next week about some funding that is, you know, available to the sector, which is good. But you might have seen from other things like the outdoor education sector world and some of the buildings and the pressures on them. It is going to be a huge pressure. For me, for young people, the demand for youth work is never greater. So we're facing these pressures for cuts, but at the same time, the demand around mental health and well-being, around school and education, around a number of big policy things is there, but beyond that, it's just relationships. We need people in having positive, trusted relationships with young people to support them, to encourage them, to get alongside them, to do stuff that takes them away from thinking about COVID. Be that kind of getting involved in creative kind of activities, getting involved in, on the digital space, we're talking about maker space and all sorts of different stuff that Youthwork's involved in, quite creative stuff. So that's just some of the challenges, but also the opportunities. I think there is a real demand for youth workers in the youth work sector, and we're working very hard to ensure that some of the funding that we do have out there is directed more towards youth work.
Amazing, that's great. It's always good to hear that there's future planning coming, because I think there is a huge question around finances around all this, isn't there? But that's for Katie Forbes to answer, not for us. So I'm actually going to jump in because we've had a comment come in, and I'm going to ask you another question first.
Okay.
Right together. So the question I'm going to ask is, does church-based youth work outside of a Sunday service qualify as regulated or unregulated?
Right. Okay. I think not youth work, but some churches are used for regulated education, early years, and childcare use. So I'm going to try and pop some stuff on the guidance around that in terms of permitted uses. Hold on to see if I can get it on my screen. That might be too many things for me to do at once. Let's see if I can manage. Hold on. Yes, I'm going to kind of send you some stuff here, which lets you know about the kind of the permitted uses that are there within a church space. We were keen to kind of push back a wee bit on some of the phraseology around this. So regulated work can mean different things to different people. Anybody who's PVG checked is regulated in that sense, but this is more about regulations in terms of, as I say, education, childcare, things that the care inspector are interested in. That's what they mean by regulated. So in terms of youth work outside of Sunday services, it's not seen to be one of those regulated in that sense, but you don't need to use that wider indoor regulated guidance. That's why the youth work specific guidance is a place and a space for you to do youth work under that guise.
Amazing. I've just stuck that up into the chat and into the comments for everybody to see, so you can access that directly. And the question that came in was actually from Yvonne. Hi Yvonne, how are you? Is regulated, non-regulated children's youth work following the same guidance with regards to meetups, etc.?
Is regulated and non-regulated. I mean, the guidance that we're talking about in terms of youth work is covering all of that. You're not going to be doing anything different that is underneath that non kind of regulated. I suppose it's a lot of the regulated work is a different context. We're talking about education. We're talking about in schools. We're talking about some of the stuff around distancing. So you really need to look at it more in the youth work. It's very difficult to generalize because some youth work is happening in prisons. Some youth work is happening in schools under a school banner, and therefore could come under and some youth work is happening in social work contexts. So it's a very kind of broad church that we have within youth work. But if you stick to the youth work guidance, that should be relevant for most of you. And if it's not really youth work, if it's more church or worship based kind of activity, then you'd need to follow the more general advice on indoor activities for non-regulated work.
Yeah, and have you? I guess a lot of people are trying to work out exactly where things fall in, because there are some grey areas in between, aren't there? Like what? Like have you guys been hearing a lot of people kind of struggling with where the differentials are, or most people being able to kind of group together?
Yeah, I think the main thing is to say don't panic about it all. This is guidance, to kind of get you working. I think what you've got to do is make sure you can check in with your board or your church or whichever governance structure, because you'll not be the only person thinking about this. People are thinking about it in many different contexts. So some of the guidance relating to workplace connects to some of the guidance relating to transport. I think there is an effort to kind of synthesize and simplify that. We certainly try to do that through an FAQ section on our site. But in terms of youth work, we've given that guidance that we've got approved through Public Health Scotland, but there's lots of other specific guidance that Scouts have produced or Youth Scotland and other agencies. So things about looking for the stuff that is most appropriate for your context. It is guidance. It's all trying to kind of help you navigate safely the best thing to do. There's no one running around. There's no police running around to try and check exactly what you're doing. It's about doing it safely and wisely and using the guidance that's in front of you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Yeah, and we've obviously got somebody who knows what's happening in the future who was asking a question, because they've said as of the 14th of September, Scotland measures are being tightened. Maybe I've just missed that in the news. I don't know. How does this impact the published youth work regulations?
So I think what it said today was that some of the stuff that was going to be opened up on the 14th of September around indoor sports or soft play and extra things that were coming in place, that those activities were not now going to happen. So you know the way that with the kind of between phase 3 and phase 4, there's a kind of here's things that might come somewhere in between phase 3 and phase 4. And what happened today, from what I can see, although I wasn't able to kind of watch the press briefing, was that some of those extra things were kind of being held back and stopped from starting to happen on the 14th of September. So from my understanding, there isn't any change to what's going on within the youth work regulations and guidance. There might be in terms of more broad, it could be that it's being looked at, I don't know for definite, but in terms of the general guidance for indoor activity with children and young people more broadly, rather than specifically through a youth work activity and a youth work frame, it might be that they're looking to kind of make changes there. All of these things are potentially up for changes and can be rolled back the way as well as rolled forward in terms of opening things up. I mean, I think all of us imagine this path, or want to imagine, quite rightly so, this pathway towards ever increasing opening up. But we've seen with local lockdowns and so on, it's just not going to be that simple. But I have not heard, and I've confirmed with government today that our guidance is still effective as it is. But that's not information I've had that youth work specifically will kind of have more restrictions by the 14th of September.
Amazing. Right, let's see. This is all going we're getting through tons here, Tim. You're answering all these questions, right? Okay, here's the next one. How are the new guidelines impacted by localized restrictions? And I'm acutely interested in this because I'm in East Dunbartonshire and everybody else has been misbehaving. I've been good, but you fly with the crows, you get shot with the crows, Tim, eh?
Yeah, indeed. Well, as far as I'm aware, again, the youth work guidelines aren't impacted by that. There's again a web link that I'll try and post while we're talking around what's happening with local measures. But they apply to households mostly. So a lot of them, when you read the detail on them, it's all about households and how many people can meet up in households, which has changed for everybody now. But before now, there was specific restrictions on those local areas. But in terms of doing indoor youth work, there was no changes within that. I think what you would want to consider though is in terms of your numbers and your size, and this is just my suggestion, it's not in guidance, but just kind of being aware of the surroundings that you're in. It might be that your volunteers are more liable if they're having to travel to come and volunteer from a distance or from an area that to be a hotspot area, if you like. You need to kind of be making a judgment call about that. But as it stands in those areas, people are still going to school and people should still be going to youth work.
Great. No, perfect. That's all good. We've got a few questions coming in on the comments as well, so we'll get to them in a wee second. But I'd love to ask you this one here, which is more of a wider question. Are there any emerging themes that Youthlink is picking up on from young people across Scotland? Like, are there, well, it's actually in the question. I don't need to explain it anymore.
Yeah, well, a big one, we did a survey called Lockdown Lowdown with Young Scot and the Scottish Youth Parliament. And we've got, the good news is we're going to have other runs of that before the end of the year. Like 2,500 young people surveyed. And we wanted to do that because, everybody was making decisions for young people, but not very many people were asking them, or at least asking them formally, what they thought about some of these changes. And I think we all know the impact of that through exams and everything that happened there. And what the young people told us was that, a number of them were really concerned about the mental health and well-being of themselves, but also of their friends and family. I also sit on the mental health and well-being program board for children and young people. That's kind of been paused for a little while, but we're getting information back in now, which is worrying a little bit in terms of anxiety levels rising and trends in terms of young people's mental health that haven't been great during lockdown. Now, there's always exceptions to these things. I think some young people with neurodevelopment kind of issues and challenges, actually for them not being in a social space in school and the relief of pressure from school has been a good thing for some of them. But across the piece, I think the lack of ability to socialise and for young people to meet together face to face is a concern. There is and also a leadership group in government around vulnerable children and young people. So again, young people already and looked after and accommodated young people facing other barriers or from different equality groups. There has been potentially a detrimental impact on them. So youth work hasn't gone away. There's been some youth work services very much delivering through detached work and also in some of the community hubs and support hubs that have been happening. There's also been youth workers involved in social care settings and social care spaces. So there's definitely something that was pre-COVID. It was already an issue, and they were talking about how we need to think about community hubs and other ways of getting not your professional CAM service. We need investment there, but we also need that preventative kind of aspect and role of what youth workers can do, what teachers can do. So a big focus on that. And I suppose just in terms of return to schooling and young people's kind of, the survey, I suppose, demonstrated that young people were concerned about their future. They were looking around them and, they were ready. This is already a generation very concerned, and rightly so, about climate change. And when you add to that the financial prospects and education, employment, then all of those things are challenging. So I think that is very much in the mind of government and public services across the piece, which is, yes, there's a public health risk from COVID that is affecting children and young people potentially a bit less than it's affecting older people. And then you've got to kind of balance that with all of the other issues there are for young people not being able to engage in sport, not being able to meet and socialise with their friends. And all this youth work stuff that we do that knits a lot of these things together is seen to be really important. And I've had a lot of input from sectors outside of ourselves who really have seen the importance and value of youth work during this crisis, and stepping into things like digital platforms and making sure that they run services for young people. Please stop me because you disappear off the screen for a wee minute for me, Des, and I'll just go on and on and on. So
it's okay.
Do the Paxman on me, or
I do know that you will go on for a long time. It's fine. If it's getting out of hand, I'll stop you. That was all good, though. We've got a couple of comments here. One from Adrienne down in Ayr. They don't have a church building. Can we meet? And I think what Tim would say, and I might be speaking for you, Tim,
go for it.
It really depends on your context. So it'd be really hard for him or for us to say, yes, you can meet if you're going to meet in a Wendy house in your back garden with 34 young people like that. That would be a bit crazy. So we'll maybe we need to go a little bit more specific with that. We've got a great question here as well from Adrienne up in Newton Mearns. If we have a youth worship service, do the young people need to wear face coverings as it is a service rather than a youth group?
I don't think. Well, that's probably over to people on the call who know more about the church and worship-based guidance. But I don't think that you do need to wear face coverings in that setting. But I think that one I would need to kind of go and double check what the guidance is. What we should also always say about face coverings is that there could be good reasons for young people not to be wearing face coverings. And adults in the population as well. And I think there is a lot of concern at the minute about some of the stigmatizing and things that are happening to some groups of young people. I mean, that's interesting. It's about the definition of when is it worship and when is it you're actually doing a kind of youth work session. I mean, what is a general guidance for? I've been doing digital church, so I've not gone back in myself.
Franny McGrath, who knows everything about everything. Hi, Franny. He said for the C of S anyway, yes, they do, because it is a worship service and they're inside. So he's not actually said that. I've added in the bits in between. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose the point is you're mixing in with other adults and other things, but if you're there as a children, young people on a different purpose, then there might be space within that. But again, that leave it to others to kind of make sure you get the right guidance up there. It's not my domain.
Yeah, and then let's see, we've got quite a few questions about outdoor different things, but I think there's one question that really kind of sums it all up quite well. Is this one here, Tim, which is, what about children's work being done completely outdoors? We of participants different from the number 30 as given for indoors, and if not, why? There's actually 3 questions there, but yeah.
I can't remember what does it say? I can't even remember what our guidance says about outdoor. I was focused on indoor. I mean, I think that outdoor, yes, there's more, there's less risk, isn't there? In terms of what you're doing outdoors compared to being indoors. I think in terms of numbers of groups, it's probably to do with the balance between that and the number of workers and youth workers that you've got within that space, and in terms of a gathered group. I believe our guidance probably does say no more than 30 as well for outdoor, but I haven't actually got that in front of me, so I'll plug to kind of go and get it up there. Let me just I haven't put the link up, so I'm going to put that in the chat function.
You've been putting it in the chat function already.
If you go to there's a wee thing at the back of the no, that was the kind of worship based stuff, but there's stuff here about sort of, that's the kind of official youth work guidance I've just put in to the chat, and on the very back page there's 2 or 3 pages of what the number limits are for different settings.
Sure. There you go. That's it up there for everybody. I think as well, like, I have to be totally honest, guys. Like, I think we need to be sensible with all this stuff. Like, we are called, as Christians, and especially as Christian leaders, to be above reproach. So, to be honest, I don't want to be taking any risks I don't need to. And I would really encourage you guys to do the same. I would really encourage you to play it safe as much as you can. And actually, you know, I think it's great that we're talking about meeting in huge groups and all that ambition. And, you know, we can talk about where my faith level is, but my faith level is that I love Jesus and I want to protect the people that I care about the most.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
I think we need to be sensible before we're rushing back, you know.
You need to think what you can actually manage as well. You know, again, you know, yes, young people are meeting outside. There's still for those over 12, we're still looking to kind of keep that social distancing space and so on between young people, because what you've got to consider is it's not like the same young people that are within a classroom who are also trying to still keep a bit of social distancing where they can. You've actually got a whole lot of different young people mixing as well within that. So if you know, I mean, yes, they're all your young people, but, you know, if they're coming, it's not necessarily the same people every week. They may be coming from a range of different schools. And that's where all of the kind of specific numbers comes in, I suppose, around sports and other activities. So there's quite a clear message in the guidance. Have a consideration of how many interactions you've had as a youth worker on a given day with young people. And also consider how many interactions they've had. You know, everyone's got to make a judgment call about that in terms of how many different groupings that they could have moved around in a day.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's one of the things where it can get a bit tricky, isn't it? You know, like if I meet someone for coffee in the morning and then I meet someone for lunch at some point, you know, that's 2 of the people that I can meet up with. So we just need to be thinking through some of that stuff. And Adrian, I'm sorry for saying a Wendy house. Yes, no, the church office, I think it all comes down to size, space, location, how many people you can get in, safety parameters. Nothing's off limits as long as it's safe. Am I right? You know, it's about making the right choices in the safe space with your people. So, yeah. There's a lot of people been saying the guidance says 30 indoors and outdoors, and Gordon Ross has rather helpfully put up the guidelines here that you can all have a wee look at there.
There you go. Brilliant. Yeah, that's it.
So the joy of modern technology, it's all very cool. We've got a wee question here. People are throwing questions in on the chat. So let me put this one up for you. It's from Gary Torbett. And just to clarify, household restrictions don't apply to youth work. So we just have to follow the Youthlink COVID guidance. I think we're hearing, but just to check.
a mixture. I don't know if they were trying to double up. Well, I'll take 6 households and whatever, 8 households as it was at the time, and 2 youth workers, and I'll add them to this other youth work session, and you know, all this sort of stuff. So no, it is the household guidance. Where the household guidance is relevant, we don't actually have guidance around as adults in groups. Then we're trying to kind of discourage that and say, look, can you do that online? Can you do that in a different way? Or if you are doing it, can you do it, you know, outdoors? And then the household guidance is more relevant because there's not specific guidance about you meeting up. That's not the same as sort of meeting up to prepare for an activity or something, but you know, or just before an activity. But if you're, you know, if you're kind of meeting up under the banner of youth work, but it's just youth workers meeting up, what is that? Do you know what I mean? That comes under a whole different set of guidance, which is really about you know, thinking through the general guidance for adults out there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a question here about the first part of the advice in the guidance, Tim, which is the advice says to do it to a level that's demonstrable. Who is this demonstrable to, and how is this best communicated to different groups? Yeah, so
kind of clear, demonstrable is about an evidence. It's just about a clear process and a clear plan that you have for the activity. So a risk assessment and then a process that's signed and dated to show that it is being actioned, really. So something that for you records this has happened. It's not just that somebody said they've done it and they've checked the kind of venue and they've checked the hygiene. This is about, and this is one for the youth work sector. I think I need to say this to everybody on the call as well. We've kind of pushed for because of the concerns about there not being youth work for young people. We've pushed as much as we can with government to say, yeah, and public health, what can be done? We need to sort of open this up. But we've done that on the basis that we've got a sector that's wise, that's professional, that knows how to, you know, plan activities, and that knows how to, you know, do stuff under proper guidelines and risk assessments. So again, look at our guidance. There's a lot of stuff in there about getting the facility right, making sure that you've got a clear system that records who was involved in an activity, so that if you have to do a kind of test and trace thing, you can then be, you know that you've got a log, you've got a record. And any good youth work should always have had a log of young people who were coming and recorded and all the rest of it. So, you know, you should have those systems in place. So that's, I guess, if you did have an inspector, some youth work is subject to inspections in some places, and somebody comes in and says, so let's show me your processes, you need to have some.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, great. Sorry, I'm just realising that some of the answers you're giving are answering some of these other questions, so I'm just trying to move through them. We've got a new one here. It just came in earlier today, and it says, this morning the NYA said the youth sector activity is recognised as essential by the UK government. Is this recognised, or I guess / going to be recognised as essential in Scotland?
Yeah, so it's irrelevant to Scotland, is what I would say. Or not irrelevant. I mean, we work nicely and in partnership with Lee Middleton and other ones at the NYA in England. But, you know, think about education as being, you know, you go to school in Scotland and you do a Scottish education system and you get an SVQ in. Likewise with youth work, it's a completely devolved area for Scotland. What we've tried to do, though, with our guidance is speak to the English National Youth Agency, the Irish National Youth Agency, North and South Welsh Agency, regularly have calls with people to make sure that, you know, because recognising that some are UK-based organisations, and to as much as possible to keep these things together. But I think we all see in the wider scope of things that there are national variations, there are regional variations, there are local variations, but yeah, no, it's not something that is relevant here. I suppose the point about essential, though, there was a big debate at the beginning about key worker status and what does essential mean and all the rest of it. I think the fact that youth work has guidance that allows you to do more than other general activity with children and young people that's out there shows you that there is a kind of understanding and trust from government and other sectors that we are an essential service, that youth work is doing so many essential things across, right at the beginning of this crisis, a lot of, you know, kind of food security, give it, you know, lots of kind of visits to children and young people. And yeah, so I think we've really stepped up the digital offer, lots of things. So we're every bit as essential as what's going on down south. But yeah, it's don't follow the NYA guidance when you're in Scotland.
Great advice.
It's the English National Youth Agency. I might suggest you put an E in front of the NYA.
That would make a lot of sense. It would certainly make it a lot more simple.
Yeah.
Just a few people have been messaging me in here. We just want to clarify what are the guidelines on masks inside and out for young people? Because I think there's just been a little bit, maybe when we've been talking over everything, it's just got a little bit confused. Could you just give us is it okay, is it not okay for young people to wear masks inside?
Okay, so I've got an FAQ section on this. I'll just read directly rather than if I can find it. I mean, in terms of youth work, there's no requirement. There's a particular section that I'm just looking for. So give me a wee second. See if I can get it up.
For that, share the funniest comment we've had so far, because if you put an E in front of it, then it would be the Enya, which is surely Irish. I'm very impressed with that. Thanks, mate.
No, NYA, just to clarify, is the English National Youth Agency. They mostly link to statutory-based organisations. There's another one for more voluntary-based organisations. So Youthlink Scotland is actually unique. I'll just get this plug in now across the UK and some of Europe as well, because we have the local authorities, the statutory youth work, and the voluntary organisations together underneath the banner of Youthlink Scotland. So I found the bit that I was looking for. So there's a bit in the new guidance which says we should be expecting 2 metre distancing between adults and young people, and between young people 12 and over at all times. There may be exceptional circumstances where this is not possible, and here face-to-face coverings should be worn. But it would be helpful to be clear that 2 metre distancing is the expectation. On dedicated transport, all youth workers and all children and young people aged 5 and over are required to wear face coverings in line with guidance for public transport, unless they have a condition for which a face covering would be appropriate. Now, given that's a very specific question, I'm going to go and try and look and get copy and paste that in so that everybody has it while we're talking. Okay, let me just kind of find that and put it in. But again, you'll find that very specifically mentioned under health and hygiene within youth work indoors. So I guess it's quite similar to schools in that sense. You know, it's not the young people themselves are not, and I think there's judgment calls to be made here as well in terms of whether youth workers want to be doing that, even if the young people aren't. I think that's the point.
Yes. Cool. I hope that was helpful for the people that messaged me in there. We've got another couple of questions to try and get through. We're also running out of time, so if you do have any comments or questions, get them in now. That would be amazing. And here's one about risk assessments, which are my favourite thing on the planet. Does a central risk assessment cover all? Does one risk assume that the national, sorry, this hasn't been typed particularly well. Does one risk assessment that is the National Church of Scotland office in Edinburgh cover all Church of Scotland youth work? Or does each church and each organisation have to have their own risk assessment? I think based on what you were saying, it would sound as though it's just good practice anyway, but I'd love to know what you think.
Yeah, well, I think, yes, you can adapt from a national plan and you can use that, but like any risk assessment, and I can see there's people on this comment stream that are much more regularly doing this stuff and up to date with this stuff than I am. But any good risk assessment has to be your risk assessment, has to be localized, has to be adapted, has to be owned by you, and not just by you as an individual, but you know what I'm talking about, your organization at a local level. Otherwise, it's just a bit of paper and it's not a process. So even if it's a case of you taking the guidance, reading it, and then making sense of it within your context, that's got to happen. Otherwise, it's just a bit of paper and it's kind of meaningless. That's my general. I mean, it depends what you mean by the word cover. I'm not trying to kind of put you under pressure to say what you're not doing. You know, if it depends on the size of the denomination and how many you know, I suppose church bodies are part of that. But I think any good risk assessment is a risk assessment that's owned locally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've just also just into the comments, I've just put the thing about face coverings that you shared there. So everybody's got that now. So that's good. Yeah, risk assessments are well worth it. They seem a total waste of time until you actually need it, right? And actually, they do make a huge difference to just the the care of the young people that we really care about. It's well worth spending your time doing. We've got another risk assessment question here as well for you, Tim, which is youth worker training has not focused on risk assessments. Should frontline workers, mostly volunteers, be encouraged to ask their church leadership body to do this for or stroke with them?
Yeah, it should be part of training. So I have to come back on that, saying it's not part of training. If you're, if you've done child protection training and health and safety training, then risk assessment is going to be in there somewhere. I think sometimes people see it as quite a scary word and think it's this massive, massive document. I mean, every time you come to do a session with young people outdoors or in other contexts, you've probably done a risk assessment of, the travel to get there, the ratios in terms of youth workers to young people. So it doesn't need to be a massive thing. I'm going to send a link again, Des, to some good resources. Actually, there's 2 or 3. I probably should have done it one by one. I don't know how that comes through in that channel. But there's a kind of induction checklist on our website for basic youth work training, the kind of key things that you should be covering. So I'm sure safeguarding, health and safety will be in there somewhere. There's also a link, as well as a general guidance. We've got practical resources that the sector's put up, and many of those have guidance around risk assessments. The third one there is from Youthlink Scotland, in terms of reopening indoor youth work, a toolkit, and it's got a very kind of simple, straightforward risk assessment template that you can use if you're not using that already. But you do want to be making people accountable. So, if you're a one-man, one-woman band within a church or youth setting, there'll be other professionals in that church or in that organization that you're working with who oversee risk assessments around the building. Maybe there's people in the board of trustees. Maybe some people have this as their full-time job. So I think it's about, getting other people involved for that kind of wider assessment that you need to do, especially if it's about facilities and the use of a building. I think that's where you should be relying on. There'll be other people using that space. Something we haven't talked about just at the minute, and I think it's really important. We've actually been pushing quite hard, and I'm hoping there's going to be guidance soon around community centres and facilities, because it's one thing to have a guidance about the activity, but then if your community centre is saying that it's not, it's not there, and it doesn't make sense within our setting because it's being used by different ages and different groupings, then we need clear guidance for centres. And that's something that we're certainly asking for at the minute, and I think it's in development. I know it's in development.
Yeah, no, that's great. There's loads of people messaging in with advice about risk assessments and stuff. If anyone wants to come and do mine for the rest of my life, I'm more than happy for you to do that. That'd be great. We've only got a few questions left, Tim. We're nearly there. 12 minutes, mate. We're nearly there. How does giving my words. How does the youth work advice interplay with advice specifically given to the church? So if the youth work is done by the church, which has specific advice for churches, where does all that land?
Right, I'm going to send another link, and hold on. This is not to scare you folks. This is just to kind of, well, it kind of is. This is all the different collection of guidance that you've got in the Scottish Government. I've not even mentioned our wider community learning and development advice for the workforce, which isn't just youth work, but it's adult education and community development, which you need to kind of have a look at too. This is a challenge as to the way that it's gone about. I think it is about sort of an interplay between different contexts and disciplines. So we had the discussion about regulation, regulated work. Well, if you're doing regulated work, as you know, it might be that somebody's using your building to do childcare services as a regulated work. Well, that guidance is going to be more important, not more important, but that's what they're going to look at rather than kind of the guidance around church and worship. So you need to kind of see the guidance that's most relevant for you in your context. And often that'll take you back to who's ultimately in charge, who am I ultimately accountable to in terms of my board, what governance structure, who in terms of the activity I'm doing. And also then recognizing that some activity can happen in somebody else's centre, then there's a shared responsibility. So there's a centre responsibility and facility responsibility for the owner of that building. And that's their responsibility, for that. So that'll be a discussion between the two of you. And that's where it gets confusing because, when are we talking about outdoor work? When are we talking about sports-based work? When are we talking about youth work? And it's hugely complicated. I think it is, though, about boiling it down for you to ask the question is, what is it you're doing? What context are you doing it in? And what discipline are you doing it? What's your kind of professional discipline and route of what you're trying to do? And I suppose our efforts within the system, within government, is to try and do more FAQs, get people to do more Q&As and sessions like this for people to talk to each other, because one of the great things during this is we've had a youth work COVID recovery group, and it's been a mixture of local authority representatives and voluntary sector agencies sharing their knowledge, and every one of those 10 really awkward questions come up, and that's brilliant, because what it means is it shows where the gaps are and it helps people understand and explain how it's been done in other places, share things like risk assessments. For example, detached youth work right at the beginning of this had a whole resurgence, if you like, because people knew that was the best way that they could keep youth work going if they weren't using digital. And again, on our website, you'll find a whole lot of shared resources around detached youth work and doing that safely and wisely. So I think as a sector, people have come together, they've shared resources more than ever before. So definitely welcome that. So I don't have any easy answer to that question. There's definitely a problem with alignment between all of the guidance, and a government are aware of it. So the more that they can simplify, the better for all of us. Yeah,
absolutely. And I guess as well, it's like anything, though, there's no one size fits all for every part of our life, is there? So, I think we need to find where we sit within it all,
But it gets to that stage, doesn't it? Will I go and make a cup of tea today? Oh, is that a shared kitchen? Oh, what am I going to do? Which towel will I wipe my hands on? How many interactions have I had today? I mean, I think there has to be absolutely a kind of, hold on a minute. It's just a bit guidance to do things safely. It's important, yes, in terms of the stop of the spread of the virus. But we just need to sometimes have a moment and we chat to ourselves and say, it's okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in some ways, I think it's like health and safety, like any health and safety risk. It's about minimising the risk as much as possible, isn't it? And just trying to be sensible, like not taking undue risks. We've got 8 minutes left, so we've got a couple of questions here. Last chance if you get any comments you want to send in. Here is the second last question that I've got then, Tim, which is, when thinking of doing youth work indoors, what should shape my thinking in terms of the type of activities offered?
So the thing about the 2 meter distancing that we talked about for over 12s, I'm using that phrase because we define youth work as 12 to 25, but I do recognise there's under 12s as well, and that's slightly different in terms of what you can do with under 12s. But you've got to think about the capacity to deliver, your ability to manage personal hygiene. With teenagers, I've got 2 teenagers. One's very good. She's very good with her personal hygiene, and my teenage son, I'm not so convinced. So we need to think about that, providing kind of plenty of opportunities for that. Think about maybe the needs, behaviours of the children and young people that you've got, and trying to think about what is right for this group of young people. What are they actually going to do? Because, we all know, and quite rightly so, young people will push the boundaries. They'll try things. They'll the things that they can't test in a school, they'll absolutely test with you in a youth work context. So in terms of the types of activities, I think it's about just being sensible around that, having good ventilation. So lots of kind of mass rave music gathering. That's not what we're talking about. If that's your form of youth work, you can do it online now. I've seen lots of things that now that I've sort of entered the world of TikTok, not entered it by doing anything, but I'm now embarrassing my teenage children by continually humming TikTok tunes to them, and that's I'm seeing lots of DJs and lots of things can happen through TikTok and online platforms and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I think you having a TikTok could be quite exciting, mate. I think you look like you've got a bit of coordination. Like maybe you could get the old dance moves on. Do you know?
The dad's moves would that would finish the relationship. Any semblance of a relationship I have with my children. So I might just do it.
Yeah, mate, it certainly keep you quiet for a while anyway. Let me stick this one up for you, buddy. So as an outdoor youth gathering, what is allowed as far as worship is concerned? Because I think there's been a bit of dubiety over this, because some of the advice says that you can sing, but you need to leave 8 meters separated. But that's based on outside event, non-professional. So I think it's just those many layers, isn't it?
Yeah, I think this is probably outside of my territory again, but Yeah, I feel like I need to make a theological point that worship isn't just about singing. But if it is about the singing, this question's about that. I think it's a no. Unless you have the same protective barriers and so on for a singer, then it's difficult to do. Now that's a kind of interesting question though, in terms of, because you've got in terms of scouts and other youth work things, you've got out the campfire experience, stuff like that. So it seems to be there's messages around singing and shouting and anything that kind of is projecting, I suppose, is seen to be potentially a risk. So unless you're doing it at a huge distance, then I think it is a challenge to actually do that at the moment. We just need to wait and see what the science says around that. There's actually stuff around general, I'll post this as well, because this is the general information about organised activity, and it talks about important things to consider. So just going to try and copy this link and send it to everybody. Oh, I've lost my screen now. Let's see if I can get you back. Okay. And it talks specifically about singing and shouting. So there's guidance for singing and shouting. Who would have ever thought before coronavirus we'd get guidance on this stuff? But it does talk about you kind of considering whether that's a safe thing to do.
Yeah. I always think shouting's a safe thing to do. Obviously from the safety of my house, that much. We've got a couple of last minute questions have just came. So I'd love to just throw these up for you. The first one is, any idea how far we are until overnight youth stays will be allowed? Good question.
Well, I just give a short answer because I've given long answers. No, I don't have an idea. But next year there was talk about schools having advice that they weren't going to be sort of using overnight until next year. I know there's a bit of pushback on that, or there's a discussion happening about outdoor centres. There's a campaign at the minute in terms of saving outdoor centres because the lack of use by them from schools groups and overnight residentials is a massive income drop. So some of our activity-based centres are under threat at the moment. So it's an issue not just for government, it's an issue for all of us in society to think, how do we kind of save this sort of national infrastructure that we have, which is really important in terms of young people's health, well-being and education, because we need to have outdoor centres. And even if it's day trips for now, great, but as soon as we can get back to residentials and overnights, then that's something we want to happen. But again, we're following the scientists and following what they say at Public Health around these things.
Great. We've got two came in. This little one here. Can a group of 30 young adults meet if youth work is for ages 12 to 25? I'm guessing they are meaning young adults under 25. Could they meet together?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is potentially if it's youth work, yeah. But again, I think we just need to be sensible with this. There is a lot of stuff around the number. I mean, what we wanted to do was see what a maximum could be at that point, and at any point that government and health could come back and say we need to bring that down a bit. So I think we were saying up to, right, but it could be, it's still more sensible to be thinking about smaller numbers. Or if you've got a bigger activity, having that really well organized to make sure there's not a lot of, kind of coming together. Again, if we think about that sort of student age range population, which is what you're talking about there, in a different context, then I think, you just need to be sensible about that, because there is kind of a maybe concern about spread within the, 20-year-olds, isn't there? That sort of 20s age range up to 30. So, I mean, the vast majority of youth work is not happening in that space. It's more like young adults or young leader programs or adult volunteers. So I'd be thinking about them as much as being young adults and volunteers, and using the kind of the information there about how many should gather, rather than seeing that as kind of mainline youth work, which predominantly is in the younger teenage bracket. Yeah, no, absolutely. Last one, I promise. This is 1 minute to go. So this one's just come in from Ali Wilson, and I don't know if there is a clear answer to this, Ali, to be honest. But with there being no clear-cut answer, would it be helpful to know what are most people following for church youth groups, stroke youth work, or place of worship guidance? I think we've kind of covered that a little bit already, but I think maybe you want to say something into it, Tim. Well, I think you can go and read an essay on InFed if you want, the Informal Education magazine down it's an internet site which talks about what's the difference between youth ministry and youth work, and you could do a whole paper on that. So I think it is about, if there's confusion, then I think you should always be asking, yeah, absolutely, ask people who, the likes of Des and others who are in this space somewhere between what is kind of youth ministry, versus kind of more youth work programs, or guidance is for youth work programs. It's not for kind of worship, and I think that comes under different guidance. If there's confusion in between the two spaces, then it might be worthwhile putting together. It doesn't need to be a full approved document or guidance, but it might be worth people putting heads together and saying, right, what's the FAQs around this? What are most people doing? How do we share that knowledge with each other?
Yeah, no, brilliant. Tim, that has been an hour really well spent, full of information. Thank you so much. I think if I could just finish, well, I know this is on your heart as well, Tim, but like our passion is to see people come to faith, and actually to see young people get to know Jesus. And actually we have a responsibility to make that as safe as possible and in the best way possible. And we're under, like, we shouldn't be under any illusion that young people don't pay attention to the way that we behave. So if you're trying to squeeze things, push things, bend boundaries, reflect guidelines, I don't think that's what Jesus would want us to do. I don't know if you would agree with that, Tim. Maybe I'll just put words into your mouth, but
yeah, no, I think we've definitely got a modeling thing to be thinking about there. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, guys, keep the questions coming. I know that Tim and the guys have been doing loads of work in the background, and we'll just keep holding you up in prayer, Tim, and the rest of your team. Thank you so much. And
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Bye. Cheerio, everybody. Bye.